Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Taxi License Committee meeting. I request everyone, if you can switch your phone off or put it on silence, please. And also, I would like to remind you again, we are here tonight in the meeting, we only noting consultation result. We're not making any decision. And also, I request all the members, if you got any comment or question, please raise your hand and come through me, not just start and direct. So please raise your hand. Thank you very much. Any apology?
Councillor Whitby is on a home visit.
Anybody else? Late item to be introduced by the chair, none. Any declaration of interest? None. Minutes of the meeting held on 22nd of September 2016. Somebody move. Outcome of the consultation on changes to taxi license administration and decision making. Mike will take through this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Firstly, Chair, I'd like to apologise again to members of the committee about the issues experienced last week and also apologise to those people in the gallery for any inconvenience that was caused. At Council on the 18th of May, it was agreed to undertake a review of the taxi licensing processes and procedures. Licensing Committee considered the proposed consultation scheme on the 14th of July, and a copy of the report considered by committee at that time has been included at Appendix 2 for information. A series of proposals and recommendations have been produced in agreement with the Cabinet member, and a consultation exercise has been undertaken. In addition to being online, hard copies of the consultation questions have also been made available at the licensing counter, and a copy of this information has been included at Appendix 3 of the report. Those people completing the questionnaire had access to a number of documents, including a draft of the proposed penalty point system, which members had already seen at their meeting on the 14th of July. In drafting such a scheme, our efforts have been made to address as many licensing issues as possible, but it is acknowledged that there will still be some circumstances that won't be covered. Information on the results of the consultation exercise is set out in a revised Appendix 4. Following on from the adjourned meeting last week, the concerns raised by members about errors have been passed back to the consultation team who provided the data for the report. Their review identified a small number of transposing errors that have now been rectified. In view of a number of comments received from members on the night, officers have taken the opportunity to clarify where no responses to certain questions were received. In total, 418 responses were received, and members will note the 2 additional lines that have been added to the bottom of each question table. This identifies the number of no responses received for that particular question. As part of the online process, a number of further comments about the proposals or other suggestions have been made, and these are set out at Appendix 5. Also, separate to the online process, a number of letters of correspondence have been received as part of the process, and these are set out in Appendices 6, 7, 8 and 9. The Cabinet member is seeking comments from committee about the information set out in the report in preparation for the Council meeting on the 23rd of November. There are 2 recommendations set out in the report, Chair: to consider the details of the results of the consultation set out in the report and to make any appropriate comments for consideration by the Cabinet member. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Any comment? All agreed? Yeah, I knew you were going to say it. Councillor Barker?
Yes, I was expecting others to speak first, but obviously they're not going to, Chair. As you might realise, I have several comments to make in relation to the policy, as I did at the early stages when we met in May. I have to say, and I don't doubt what Mike is saying in relation to the fact that copies of the draft policy or the draft point system were actually circulated, but I certainly don't recollect it. And you were saying, I think, that they were available downstairs, but one would presume that people who just filled them in online at home had not seen the draft policy or point system.
No. On the online system, there was a couple of documents, I think, attached at the bottom for further information. One was the proposed penalty points table, which members of the public and the trade who were filling in the online questionnaires could have gone and clicked through and looked at. And I think from recollection, I believe the other one was a proposed, was it the proposed scheme of delegation, I think, for the purposes of, I think, the first proposal. So if we were moving to an officer panel, so the officers would sit in the seats of members, I think there was a proposed delegation scheme set up. So they were available as part of the online consultation process as well.
Thanks for that clarification. I obviously didn't know how to work the system properly. Can I start by saying, and I have to say this again in actual fact, and I said it previously, that I have grave concern over the fact that in this particular instance, the power of being able to formulate the taxi licensing policy is being taken away from the licensing committee and given to an executive member of the ruling party, which, to my way of thinking, makes it into a political arena, brings it into a political arena, rather than the situation that we find ourselves in as members of the licensing committee, whereby we are a quasi-judicial body that has the responsibility through this council of actually bringing forward policy to full council in relation to licensing matters. Now, why I say that is because it seems to me that taxi licensing has been taken out of the general remit of this licensing committee, but there are many facets to this licensing committee, only one of which is taxi licensing. And it follows that should this committee lose its power in relation to taxi licensing, one has to say, why is that not then being adopted for liquor licensing, licensing in relation to gambling, licensing in relation to scrap metal dealers, and all the whole gambit that we actually do deal with. It seems to be the thin end of a very thick wedge, to my way of thinking, the fact that if we are looking at a concern within licensing, it should be under the remit of this committee, not taken away from this committee, because at the end of the day, we still have many areas of authority, many areas of responsibility in relation to licensing. Now, I'll say that for what it's worth. I've no doubt that it goes back to the report on the 18th of May when Cabinet Council decided, through some wonderful convoluted wording that I obviously failed to understand, which took that power away from us. But it does concern me, as I say, that we are not able to, in actual fact, put our own policy into order. And bearing in mind, it was only sort of 12 months ago, just over 12 months ago, that we, in actual fact, did substantially change taxi licensing policy in light of the Carey report and the effects of the Rotherham situation. And so, therefore, we seemed capable of it then, but we don't seem capable of it now, and that concerns me. That said, I refer back to the 18th of May when this was brought as a late item to taxi licensing, and would point out in particular paragraph 1.3, where it says it is proposed to go out to consultation with the trade and public on the proposals for a period of 12 weeks once all the key elements of the proposal have been fully developed. Now, Chair, I have grave concern that the paper we have before us today, with the key elements of the proposals, have not been fully developed. And I give a perfect example in relation to the first matter, which is the one whereby it is suggested that the public and the trade accept that we move from a base of members sitting on a subcommittee, sitting on a committee, dealing with matters appertaining to both application and also reapplication after 3 years, as it is now. It doesn't actually mention the fact that the committee, in actual fact, does more than that in relation to taxi licensing. It, of course, actually deals with revocations, it deals with suspensions, it deals with public complaints, and it deals with totting up within that policy. Now, am I led to believe then that as far as this consultation is concerned, those matters still remain with this committee, and that the only thing that we are talking about here is application and reapplication and reissue, and so therefore the committee still retains its power in relation to everything else? Can somebody answer me that question to start with, please?
Chair, the answer to that is that that's incorrect. Decisions to grant or renew, let's take a step back. In granting or renewing a license application, the potential to revoke or suspend is inherent in there. And so I don't think in my view, the distinction which Councillor Barker is making about whether one aspect of it still remains with the committee while others do not, I don't think I agree with him on that, no.
Chair, well, I understand what our legal advisor is saying, but if you look at the licensing consultation document and the forward by Baggy Shankar, it specifically says that the two options are, one, to strengthen the application process for those people applying, or for renewal of a licence. It doesn't mention revocation. It doesn't mention totting up. It doesn't mention complaints of the public. If you go to the question similarly says an officer-based system for deciding licence applications only. Now, it doesn't say revocation. It doesn't say, I know I can keep repeating that, but you know what I'm getting at here. So the bottom line is, are we saying then that the consultation document has actually duped the public and also the people that actually completed it from the trading and so forth, because the question doesn't make it inherently clear as to what we're saying? Because if I don't understand it, and if I can find that flaw in it, I'm sure that everybody else was saying, well, I didn't vote for that. I voted simply because for application. And so it seems to me somewhat, again, we're going back to that 1.3 in the 18th of May paper relating to key elements of the proposal have been fully developed. There is no way they've been fully developed if in actual fact there is such a gross anomaly in the actual questioning as to make it misunderstood by everybody concerned. And everywhere you can go in this document, it just says the same thing. Everywhere you look in the whole document, it just says application and renewal. It does not say the interim measures that are dealt with this committee on a day-to-day basis. And so therefore, I think that is flawed, which puts the consultation as flawed, which in actual fact needs to be reconsidered, I would suggest, by the author of the document, i.e. by the council member, Councillor Shanker, before it is put to full council, because it needs clarification. And again, if necessary, we will have to argue the case out again at full council, but it needs to be clarified as to what we're actually talking about here. Is it just a simple case of application? Because if you go back to what's actually triggered all this, which is the Grant Thornton report, the Grant Thornton report only relates to, in relation to the tax licensing subcommittee, 2 cases that they've highlighted, which was for an application for renewal. It doesn't highlight any anomalies, if that's what they are, in relation to any other matter that the tax licensing committee has actually decided upon. It solely relates to 2 applications which they say should not have been granted. It does not go into further detail in relation to other decisions the actual council has made. And I look at the 3 recommendations that Grant Thornton made, and I can accept 5, which is it continues to monitor members' interventions in operational matters in relation to tax licensing. I can accept, I think, 6, where it says the council should review the quality of decision-making made by the tax licensing committee and take appropriate action if it becomes evident that poor decisions are being made. Well, that presumably is the basis of the two matters that they actually highlighted. What I can't get my head around is number 7, which the council should consider whether administrative arrangements are required to create confidence in the integrity of the tax licensing function. For the simple fact is that Grant Thornton themselves reflects on the matter, on the fact that the 2 cases concerned were somewhat aged, under the old rules, under the old tax licensing policy, and since that time we made a substantial big change in relation to the number of members sitting on the committee, the introduction of DBS, and all sorts of matters like that. And I have yet to see any evidence to suggest that we are in a situation under 7 where there is a considerable non-confidence in the integrity of the tax licensing committee as it is now formed. And so therefore, whilst ever those matters that Grant Thornton has highlighted are still being considered by our standards committee, whilst ever they are, I mean, are we putting ourselves into the situation here where we are finding somebody guilty before they're actually proved innocent? And that's my concerns. We are formulating a policy here based on probably something that hasn't actually occurred. And that concerns me as well. So whilst I will, that's the basis opening on it, I don't really, throughout the whole paper, and we can go into the matters relating to all the different wish lists, as I like to call it, that's in there, and I can highlight in there quite a number of concerns as well, which again haven't been gone through in the detail that I think is required, And I think it's highlighted in there that the costings, for example, have not been put to this until such time as decisions have been made as to what we want out of that list. Well, that's fine. But if the council are making a decision based on a new robust system, they must know what it's going to cost before they actually do it, because it could be cost restrictive, or if not, we are in a situation where we still must have a strong and robust system which gives protection to the public, and also in relation to safeguarding, etc. There are elements in here, for example, and it's my understanding that it's no longer available, but there's a wish list one in here in relation to driver's tests, the DVLA Hackney Enhanced Wheelchair Accessibility Vehicle Test. And my understanding is that that's no longer available. So if that's the case, why is it still in the paper? Why hasn't it been pulled? Because if DVLA test, and we vote for it, we voted for something that in actual fact isn't available. So that makes this council a farce, an absolute farce. Things like penalty point system, as I say, I've not particularly seen that, and so therefore I can't comment on it. But I do have concerns as to whether or not it could cover every eventuality. Whether or not we move on to things like driver's tests. I in actual fact do accept driver's tests, but there are other authorities, and I don't want to tread on a colleague's views in a moment, but there are other authorities who actually do in-house tests. So if DVLA aren't available for us, should we be looking at in-house tests for drivers? When you start looking at age limits, I mean, there are people in actual fact who pass the test at 17 years of age, and because of their personal circumstances can't in actual fact afford a vehicle. So it's quite feasible that in actual fact, by the age of 18 or whenever, they've actually not driven the car from the day they pass the test to the day they apply for a taxi licence. And are we, as a city authority, going to in actual fact subject our public to potentially a person who in actual fact hasn't driven a car since the day they passed the test? I passed a test for HGV in 1997, and I still have got an HGV licence. I haven't driven an HGV since 1997. Thank God. Yeah, thank God, very much so. But it's a fact. It's a fact. You get people coming from abroad to this country who may well have a licence from their own country. I think it's still the case where after 6 months they should be applying for a British licence, but and subsequently therefore should not be running on the licence from their own country. I think that's still the case. In the European law these days, I never know, it might have changed. But if that's a fact, you know, do they have a year from then, from the 6 months? Or, in other words, what I'm trying to say is it needs a lot more thought before we in actual fact would consider passing that. J and Casey reports into exploitation. Nobody is going to deny the fact that there probably should be some safeguard training for drivers. But what we haven't looked at is the potential for, other than the fact that that could be in-house from a taxi company. Well, who's going to verify that? Who's going to prescribe the fact that that is a bona fide training course? Where is it going to cost? Or who are we suggesting that in actual fact should be doing it if it's not done in-house? You need some meat on the bones. If we're going to put that policy into place, you need to be certain that it's the right policy and not just a wish list that people have voted on the say, oh yeah, that sounds a good idea, we'll have some of that, you know. Right to work, I can accept that. New immigration bill and everything, that's no problem at all. Of course, what goes along with that, though, of course, is the fact that it's being suggested that we actually have an electronic system whereby people apply for a licence online. I could apply for a licence in your name, Mike, online. But if I come to the counter with my passport or with my driving licence and it's got a picture on of me, they know I'm not Mike Kay. You can't do that online. We haven't got the software to be able to do it. So therefore, it needs costing out. It needs looking at in relation to, right, is the software out there to be able to do that before we actually jump and say, yeah, we'll have some of that, you know. Because otherwise you end up with a situation that's worse than we've got now. Because you are not identifying that drivers are the right people. At least if they come into the building with some form of identification, you've got them there. But to fill a form in anonymously on a computer does not give me any confidence whatsoever in the fact is that this system is supposedly robust. And so therefore it needs meat on the bones. As I say, Chair, I've got a list. I can go through every one if you want. But what I'm trying to say at the end of the day is that some of the concerns in this paper that I have got, and I have no doubt that some of my colleagues have raised, have looked at as well, really need the expertise of people that are actually on the licensing committee now to be able to, shall we say, put that meat on the bones and to actually say, well, hang on a minute, I remember this, you know, some years ago we dealt with it this way or whatever. Not everybody on this licensing committee has been on this 12 months. Many people have been on for many years. And so therefore there is an expertise within the licensing committee. If we take that away from the licensing committee and not only give it to an officer and or to give it to a cabinet member, I feel that we in actual fact are making a situation worse rather than better in relation to the robustness of this policy. I believe personally that we made great strides in the last few years in relation to policy. And yes, except for a bit of an argument over something last year, we in actual fact fully agreed at Council a new robust policy in relation to taxi licensing. Wasn't particularly enjoyed by some of the drivers at the time, but we've got over that hurdle now. And I think from the figures that I've seen, just quickly reading down these here, what you would expect the driving community to, in actual fact, not accept quite a lot of the proposals that we put forward. I think that was always going to be the case. I think in fairness, reading some of the comments that are in the bundle as well, there is an acceptance by the drivers that they want a system within this authority that in actual fact is robust and fair, not only to the public, to give them the professionalism as well, but also fair to them as well. And I am the first one to say we should not only be concentrating on this to take forward, but we should also be concentrating on the problems which we have no control over, which is out-of-town drivers. That is the big problem that we have in this city at this moment in time. And my concerns are, if we implement this without carrying some of the trade with us on some of the issues, we will drive them away from this city. They will be getting licenses elsewhere. And if they get licenses elsewhere and come back and work in this city, we have no control over them whatsoever. And so therefore we're worse off than we are now. And so I'd like to close by saying I hope that the Cabinet member will take these points on. And as I say, if he wishes to spend time with me to go through the rest of these things, whereby I have got raised concerns, I am more than happy to in actual fact do that. But to push this paper through now for the 23rd of November is not good for this council. It is far, far too open and open to interpretation, and as it stands at this moment in time, it's got more holes in it than Swiss cheese.
Thank you, Thank you, Councillor Walker. For
We split Sure. Because I suspect that there'll be a lot of repetition. And if we deal with some of the points he's made, I think we may some how to ask questions. You want to do it? Members, I was just trying to have a discussion there with the chair and the other senior officers to see what the best way to deal with this is, on the basis that if all the members ask such detailed questions, we might well be here a long time. That's permissible, that's understandable. However, what we're thinking is perhaps it would make sense to address each member's questions individually. And that way we might be able to actually deal with some of the questions which other members may have in the offing and cut back on the time. Are you all happy with that? And I can try and pick up on some of the points which you made in there. I know. I mean, there were quite a lot of points you made there. I mean, I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I know there were a lot more than that. But I think what I want to try and do is just try and address some of the more fundamental ones. Starting right from the very top, the very first point you made was about the licensing process having now been devolved to an executive member. That's not accurate either. What has actually happened here? The executive cannot undertake licensing functions. Council functions fall into 3 groups: council decisions, executive decisions, and regulatory decisions. Licensing is a regulatory decision, and constitutionally, statutorily, cannot be made by a member of the executive. So no decision is being made by the executive. What has happened here is that council, which makes the constitution and delegates powers to the licensing committee, has tasked an executive member to go back and come up with proposals. The final decision will still be council's. There's no decision being made by the executive member. That's the key point I'm making here. In terms of that point as well about divesting licensing committee of its policy-making powers, that again is not entirely accurate. All that has been divested of licensing committee is the power in relation to the administrative change. Licensing committee retains all of its policy-making powers. It was only that one facet which was divested from them. And the reason why it was divested from them, from committee, was because, as you say, what Grant Thornton said in their report was for council to give consideration to whether any changes are made. And so that council decision in May effectively is the council decision based on giving consideration to what Grant Thornton said. So there is no anomaly there. There is no, I think you used the expressions flawed and gross anomaly. That's not the case at all. There is a procedural reason why things have panned out the way they have been. If it was the question that the executive member is making this decision, and that's what will follow, then I would agree with you that there's a flaw in the administrative process. There is none. He's only making a recommendation to council, which council can accept or council can reject. And I think it's because I know this is a public setting, it's important to make that point so people don't go away believing that, in fact, it's a done deal. It's not. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And indeed, that's why I say that a lot of the points which you've made, I'm not going to address, because a lot of those are debate points for full council, and not necessarily for the officers here to have to address. You mentioned as well going out to full consultation only once fully developed. I think the point to remember is that at the point at which that was made, there was nothing, not even in draft, to do with a policy, to do with any of these meat on the bone points which you mentioned. And it was the development of them as proposals that that report, as I understood it, was driving at. The report, you mentioned not having seen the draft points table. That certainly was in the May report, and that was a very, very early draft. The version that did go out ultimately was different to that because it picked up on a lot more issues. But you're right in the point you make that by implication, that points table cannot pick up every known criminal conviction or licensing transgression, or call it whatever you may. And the fundamental point to that is that what it has done is captured what it believes, as at today's date, is something in the region of 99% of known convictions, transgressions, which affect the license trade. But day to day, you get legislative changes, you get case law decisions which change the status quo. So we may wake up tomorrow and there's been some decision in the High Court in London which completely turns taxi licensing on its head. It means if there's a decision to be made on Friday, that's not accommodated within the points table. That means fundamentally that there's no delegation to officers to make a decision based on that kind of scenario, and it will have to come back to a panel of members, because officers only act on delegated powers. Their delegated powers are to effectively apply, if council goes in that direction, are to apply the points table. If it's not in the points table, it's back to a panel of members. And I think that's a very important point to make as well. So there's still the facility there fundamentally for members to be involved in this. Officers are fairly certain that they have picked up on what they need to pick up as at today's date, but who knows what's going to happen or change tomorrow. I go back to that point you made as well about applications and renewals. And again, I make the points from an officer perspective, from an administrator's perspective, that there's no flaw, there's no gross anomaly. The consultation paper had, as one of its appendices, the points table. And that points table clearly references revocations, it references suspensions, it references complaints. You cannot read, what the point I'm making is you cannot read the consultation questions in isolation of all of the other supporting information which came with it. They all go as a package. And understanding that so that you read the consultation questions alongside the points table will give you the answer to that point, that there is no separation here whatsoever of revocations and suspensions or complaints. They are all accommodated within the consultation. So people have not been misled in that sense, is the point I'm making. It was all there. It was all available for people to consider and take into account in making their representations.
Sorry, Chair, if I might just come back to Olu on that one then. If that's the case then, Olu, why haven't we got a copy of that points table in this bundle now? So that these people here, they might not have filled in an application, a consultation document. Why isn't the points table in here? Because I would suggest that most of these members haven't seen it.
Councillor Barker, I think if you remember from the July licensing committee, that points table was actually included within it. I've got a copy of the papers here, and you were one of the members on that in the minutes of that. So that has been given to all members of the subcommittee. In addition to that, it was as a link on the consultation. As you'll see from the responses from the consultation, people have addressed certain things in it. I think there was reference to taxi drivers or offences against sexual offences, which actually you picked up on in the responses, so it has been available.
Thank you, Lucy.
I understand there was a lot of information which went out, and I'm not disputing the point you're making. I'm just trying to explain that, again, because it's a public setting, that information was there. And I think the only other point I was going to pick up was the very important point you made about 18-year-olds. But I think the point we're making here is this, that, and again, I say it advisedly, we're in a public setting. There are very, very strong reasons to believe that the current restriction to 21 could be discriminatory. And if that is the case, which makes it unlawful, then it's something which the council will have to give serious consideration to. But it doesn't end there. You make a very valid point in saying someone could obtain a license today and not drive. That's why part of the package, which is being developed over here, includes a lot more strenuous tests to be taken, the DVLA test, as you mentioned, which, by the way, I should just mention, that was not necessarily do this DVLA test and now it's gone. It was DVLA test or similar, I understand, was the way it was put in place. And so there are answers to several of the points, is there what I'm trying to say. But we can have a chat about it outside of the room. Those are the key points I wanted to just pick up. Just so, again, there's no one who's living the room today feeling that they've been misled in one way or the other. But I don't know if any of my other colleagues have any other points they might want to individually pick up as well.
Yeah, just in terms of the DVLA test, would you believe almost like a week after the consultation started, we were notified that the DVLA were no longer running those driver tests? So it wasn't a case that were referred to equivalent in the actual consultation process. We've not removed it from the papers today because obviously it was a question as part of the consultation exercise. But when we are putting together the report for council for next week, we do recognise the fact that the DVL are not offering any more, and we have inserted the words or equivalent. So we have recognised that. Just on one point you made about online applications. The proposals set out were for renewals online. They weren't for new applications online. So I think the scenario that you painted about you using me, it's what the proposal is only to undertake online renewals, not online new applications. We would obviously have to have some stringent processes in place for new applicants to make sure the people who were coming to us were the people who were making the applications.
Mike, if I could just quickly add to that as well. It's not just a question of you've made the online application and it ends there. There's also what will follow, which is a verification process. And that's why you will, I don't know if it's contained in, to what extent it's contained in any detail over here, but the proposal is also to split the application process into a two-stage one, where there is effectively checking the application at stage one, and then when it's gone through that verification process, it proceeds to stage two. So again, it's not just a question of they've applied, and so there's a loophole in there for people to exploit. That wouldn't be the case. Everyone would have to go through a verification process, which if they don't scale that, the application ends. And that's part of the proposal. Sorry for interrupting you, Mike.
Thank you. Councillor Wolpack.
I don't disagree with everything Councillor Barker has been saying. I've sat here listening to it, and like everybody else, I've got concerns. So what I would like to, if everybody's in agreement, I'd like to put a recommendation forward. And it's quickly written out, so please bear with me. I'd like to ask the Cabinet Member and Director to come up with a proposal that recommends that decisions that are outside of the penalty points policy are referred to a licensing member panel for consideration. Do you want me to read that again? Okay. To ask the Cabinet Member and Director to come up with a proposal that recommends that decisions that are outside of the penalty points policy are referred to a licensing member panel for consideration. And I think that covers some of the things that Councillor Barker was concerned about with regards to the penalty point system and things not being brought in.
Chair, I can pick that up. I think that's the question to an answer I gave in my response to Councillor Barker. It's exactly the point I'm making, that if the penalty point system does not accommodate everything, then it comes back to a member panel. I think I've said as much. So I don't see anything controversial in you making that a recommendation. It's exactly what I've said before you actually said it.
Thank you. And one second? Yep. Thank you very much. All agreed in yeah, on the proposal? Yeah. All agreed? Yeah. Thank you very much. Councillor Ashwell.
Thank you. The reason why we're discussing this is not because of safety or anything to do with that. It's because some councillors have been accused of corruption. That is why it is being proposed that powers be taken away from councillors and put in the laps of officers. I don't think that that's a good reason for doing that, any more than the existence of theft is a reason for doing away with property rights. We should punish councillors just as we should punish thieves, using an independent, fair, quasi-judicial system. We shouldn't just take powers away from, responsibilities away from councillors and hand it over to paid officers. Coming to several points, there are lots of points on this, a few which struck me, one which wasn't in the questionnaire as far as I can tell, but was raised by several of the comments. That's on closed circuit TV. The police have introduced that, and it has been found to reduce conflict with the police and to make clear whose responsibility incidents have taken place. Something along those lines should be discussed with the taxi industry. I'm not saying imposed, simply discussed with it. The police last night were at our Blakeries and Littleover forum, and they were heartily supporting the existence of closed-circuit TV around houses, but the prices were very reasonable. The knowledge test, I think we should continue with that. Overwhelmingly, there was support in the comments and to the initial survey. We don't know that those support was from the industry, but I suspect so, having spoken to other people in the industry. There is a comment about rejecting incomplete applications. That's section 4.8. Which I understand to be illegal. We should not reject. We should simply return them or ask for additional information. That is my understanding of the legality of that. That's 4.8. A major issue is to keep the industry in Derby. We don't want Gedling to take control of Derby taxi trade. To do that, it needs to be fair, reasonable, and not too onerous either financially or in requiring this, that and the other. Safety isn't a problem. To raise to inject some humour, the dress code on 4.25, I would be careful with that. The company I used to work for introduced a dress code where women who met the public should not wear short skirts. The implication, of course, being that men who met the public would be allowed to wear short skirts, which was possibly not what was intended. So be careful about that. To conclude, when I started in taxi licensing, I formed the opinion that it was almost incomprehensible that taxi drivers could make a decent living given the fares that they were charging. I've not altered that opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ashwell. You want to spoon first? Go on.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I just thought it was worthwhile to put a bit of clarity on one or two of the points raised there. It probably wasn't as explicit as it needed to be, but there was never any intention to do away with the existing knowledge test. I think because of other tests were referred to, a number of representatives from the trade raised that and said, does that mean we won't be having it? That was never the intention. It probably should have been spelt out a bit more explicitly in the consultation to make that clear. The keeping taxis in Derby and not having them coming in from outside, nobody will disagree with that statement whatsoever. I can confirm, and I think a number of the members will be aware of this already, that on behalf of the licensing committee, a letter has already gone to the appropriate secretaries for state pointing out our concerns about the loophole in the law that allows out-of-town vehicles to come and trade. Similarly, there have been other reports recently at a government level based on I think some LGA representation that's gone in as well, making the same point. We are to a large extent still reliant, unfortunately, on the government changing the law and hopefully stitching up those loopholes. That doesn't look as if it's on the immediate agenda, and in the meantime, as a licensing authority, we'll continue to work with the other local authorities whose vehicles seem to be arriving here to try and find ways of stopping that. We mentioned, I think, a couple of meetings back, for example, about the fact that we've been working with enforcement team from Rossendale to inspect some of their vehicles within the city. There are similar exercises now lined up with other local authorities to try and do the same. We don't have the powers to do that. Coming into our area without permission, they are able to do that, so we'll continue to push that one forward. But we do recognise that's a major concern for everybody and certainly for all the trade bodies. Thank you, Chair.
To add John's comment, Councillor Ashburn, I can confirm that Councillor Shankar have approached cabinet members from other leads like Rosendale, Gadling, Arrowash, with the view on working together on enforcement and lobby for changing in the national legislation. So we're not sleeping on it. We don't want Gadling or any from on other towns come here and take over from Derby City taxi trade. So I can promise you that. Councillor Pegg.
Yeah, on that point, I think this is where the operators need to take some responsibility. You know, it's all right as sitting here and that. It's the operators who are making the money out of these guys coming from out of the city, and they're the ones who should be held more to account for allowing it to happen. And I think if there's anything that we can do, look at, to tighten that up on the operators side of it, because I know we brought legislation in where they're supposed to notify you when you phone up for a taxi if they're sending an out-of-town vehicle for you. They are not doing that. I know because I've done 2 or 3 phone calls myself to various companies. Then simply not telling you that they're sending an out-of-town vehicle for you. So I think that we need to look at the operators as much as anything else, and maybe start looking how to tighten it up. We're tightening it up with the taxi drivers. I think it's the operators as well that we need to start now looking at far deeper.
Thank you, Councillor Pegg. Members, I would like to adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes. I have to to the officers for some technical points. So I will adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes. So it's now 5 to 7, so meeting will start 7 o'clock.
officers are inaudible in the gallery. Councillors can be heard, officers can't.
We're probably more quietly spoken.
Okay.
Free alcohol in the back. We're into all sorts of other licensing issues there.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
If they've got some specific queries, not necessarily tonight, but tell them to come and talk to us. Yeah, no, we can deal with it.
Hello. Councillor Paul Hazelgraves.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a few comments to make. I think the first is that I believe we all here as councillors value very much the work that our taxi drivers do. Day in, day out, 24 hours a day, all weathers, providing a service to the public. It's a first-class service. They meet many visitors from the city who've never been in the city before. They act as ambassadors of the city. You only get one chance to create a first impression, and I believe that our taxi drivers do indeed deliver that very good first impression of the city. I'd like to think that all our taxi drivers are fit and proper people to be driving a taxi cab. But me thinking and wanting to think that isn't enough. I've got a duty as a councillor to protect the residents of Derby and ensure that the trade is regulated in a fair and robust manner. The public interest report and other issues such as the report by Casey and incidents in Rotherham and other cities mean that we have to make sure that our taxi regulation is tip-top and is above any accusations of any partiality or anything like that. And an objective points-based system will deliver that. There will be areas which may be considered outside the scope of the taxi license, outside the point system, that would be correctly devolved to the existing taxi and licensing committee. We have made changes. We've gone to 5 members on a panel. The membership isn't known to appellants, so there's no risk of pressure on the panel members before a hearing. But all those concerns mean that we need to go further than the steps we've taken, review our approach very carefully to taxi and licensing and its regulation, and go further than what we've done even after and in response to the public interest report. But I do feel that some steps need to be taken before a final draft is put before Council. I do think that the Cabinet member needs to undertake some consultation with the trade to look at the fine points of the points of pay system, so that anything that any misgivings they have or worries they have can be allayed when the full document, before the full document is presented. In the survey, there is consensus on some of the questions asked between the public and the trade. Questions 10, 13, 14, 16, 17, 20, 22, 23, 26, they all get consensus between the public and drivers. Number 28, which I think is driver specific, but was answered by members of the public, also has consensus. They agree on no as the answer to that, by majorities on both sides. Concerns among drivers about the fairness of the officer-based system must be addressed by the Cabinet member. For example, will a third party review a decision, maybe another council officer within the authority? Would they dispassionately review the outcome of a decision? Also, will drivers be able to put their case for why this offence has mitigating circumstances, or they feel ought to have circumstances which should be taken into account, so that there is some chance to have a chance to put your side as a taxi driver? Another question is, how long will points remain in force? How long would they be in vigour? Would more serious offences be kept on file over a number of years and roll forward? I'm thinking of, for example, speeding offences and convictions in court for various things. I think these points and these comments I've made should go to the Cabinet member for his consideration. I think a robust point system gives more reassurance to the public on safeguarding and protects all members of the trade as and their stature and trust in them by the public will be enhanced. We certainly the Labour councillors want to work with the taxi drivers to produce a fair and understandable system that is beyond reproach and becomes the system that other councillors around the country wish to adopt. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you switch it?
I don't know if you want to come back on those points before you start with mine, which you said you were going to do.
No. Thanks, Paul. Your comments were really, really good, and we will take these back to Cabinet member. Thanks. Anyone?
Thank you. Just a couple of comments probably to make back to that, and it does pick up on something Councillor Barker said earlier. There is a recognition very clearly that looking at a proposal and being able to put the bones of a proposal together in terms of its general idea and the framework around it is fine, but it doesn't put all the meat on the bones, and there is still work that needs to be done, and it will still need member involvement to finalise not just a penalty point system, but other elements of other schemes that would change licensing policy if that's what members choose to do. This is not a finished item. None of these are finished items, and there's a need for further discussion on all of them. And just to be very clear on one other point, it's not, even if you look at a penalty point system, this was not about officers making decisions in relation to somebody's particular licence. The intention was, and would be, if that's what members choose to do, to have members deciding on a policy and a points-based system and officers simply applying it. It's not to circumvent any member decision-making power whatsoever. That was never the intention. It was actually just purely and simply to be an administrative process. And I think some of the early reports talked about an officer decision-making. That's not what this is about. Is that okay, Chair? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do appreciate that clarification.
Councillor Poulter.
Chair, that's slightly changed my opening gambit then. Can I just, for clarity's sake then, can I just be clear that at the moment the schedule says that it will be considered here today, points we wish to raise or point out to the Cabinet member will be put forward to him and it will appear at full council on the 23rd and the implementation date will be the 28th. Now that's clearly impossible. So I just clarity on that for starters, please.
Just to confirm, Chair, yes, that is entirely impossible. These, as has been rightly pointed out, are very complex measures that would need to be put in place, and there would need to be still further work, still further consultation, still things to be done to make them happen. And depending on which, if any, of the proposals put forward are accepted, each of those will have a specific timetable for its introduction. Nothing will happen overnight, and certainly not by the 28th.
Well, Chair, that to a degree rests some of my concerns then, because at the end of the day, this needs to be a policy. It's this committee that's going to enforce this policy. So it needs to have the endorsement and be in arrangement with this committee to be able to have the commitment and as their policy to enforce it and administer it properly. And that said, it's not going to stop me making my actual points. And I need to take it back a little, in a few years, in fact, because this city has suffered the problems we experienced with Operation Retriever and other inquiries that went out throughout the city. In recent years, we've had full details of the terrible things that happened in Rotherham. We've had the Casey review has been issued, and in relation to our council, we've also experienced the auditor's public interest report, which is commented on the way our taxi licensing system is. With that in mind, I personally have certainly no doubt of the need to review the policy and do it properly. My concern is that at the end of the day, on the face of it, it looked like a top-down corporate policy being imposed through a process in which the committee had actually got no investment and had no major input. Because if they're asking for comments from us today, and the papers have got to be issued tomorrow for full council next week, the council cabinet member can't have given any serious consideration to what we as a committee were going to say. All that said, we find ourselves in a position whereby I don't know how many local authorities there are that have taxi licensing policies in the country, 200 and odd probably. I suspect there are 200 and odd different taxi licensing policies, and the detail of which are all different. And one way in which the system is, to me, is failing is that following the Casey report, the government should have looked at that and come up with some guidelines in relation to what is and isn't important in taxi licensing policy. I don't suggest they can be prescriptive across the country, but they ought to come up with some guidelines. And I would like to suggest as a committee that we make representations, as we are doing in relation to outside authorities taxing in the city. We ought to make representation to the relevant minister that the government ought to look at guidelines in relation to taxi licensing policy. So I'd put that forward as a recommendation for starters, Chair. Second.
You propose the recommendation. Second? Okay, we take a vote on that. Those in favour? Yeah. Carry.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Following on from that, my overriding concern here was the lack of clarity in the outcomes. I'm reassured that the officers are saying the finer points need to be detailed. My concern is this: as an authority, we owe the public and the trade and the drivers the best possible taxi licensing policy that we can come up with. We can't rush into that. I know we reviewed it last year, and this is a review on top of that. But what I've done in terms of trying to gauge whether we've got a good policy or if what's been put forward is a good policy is looked at what other areas are doing and policy in other local authority areas. So where better to go to than Rotherham? Rotherham were stripped of their taxi licensing duties. Commissioners came in. They spent 18 months reviewing the policy, and in fairness, the members now are back operationally deciding, gone back to their function, and the core function of any licensing authority, and Oliver will correct me if I'm not, if I'm wrong, it's a regulatory body, and the purpose is to set policy and also to sit on subcommittee panels and decide individual cases. And that's what Rotherham have gone back to. But Rotherham have also built into their policy some very, very important other policy factors, which these proposals that we've got so far do not cover. And I can cover some of those. I won't go into as much detail as I intended to do, because I'm reassured that we're going to get the opportunity to put these forward and discuss the merits or dismerits of them. And it's a fact that Rotherham have introduced disability awareness training, as well as child safety awareness. They've introduced disability awareness training. It's a major factor in Derby. The next committee panel I'm sitting on is in relation to problems over carriage of disability passengers, and we need a policy on that, and we need training on that. Rotherham have introduced CCTV cameras in every taxi in the city. There are big merits for that, and some dismerits, but the trade have accepted the benefits, and it is now policy that every vehicle in Rotherham has CCTV. Rotherham annually review the DBSs. We have the drivers signed up to update DBSs, and in Rotherham they review those DBSs every year rather than waiting for 3 years. In relation to drivers, Rotherham have a policy of 2 years. Nationally, when you look, and I had this at the LGA meeting on the subject, nationally what's considered is up to 3 years. Because if you think about it, you don't need an age restriction, which might be discriminatory. But if you had a policy, and my understanding, Oliver, is this, that the licensing committee can have in its policy anything that it can legally justify for the needs and the prime purpose of protecting the public of the city in their city and their circumstances.
The default length of a license.
Sorry, say again.
Is this in terms of the default length of an issued license?
It's more to that's a general point, but I'm talking specifically about the restriction of you must be 21. Councils across the country going away from the age restriction of 21 and going towards 2 or 3 years at driving experience. That way, you're justifying your decision because you're saying they need to be experienced drivers. You're not disbarring people because of age, but if somebody passes their test at 17 on the day, if you have a policy of 3 years, he's going to be 20 by the time you consider him a fit and proper person to hold a license. But by having the policy of 3 years driving experience, you cover all angles, because if you get somebody who's 35 and passes their test, then it's right that they get 3 years experience of driving before they're safe to drive people around. So I'm just going through other areas and what Rotherham in particular have brought in. Other areas have gone, as was referred to earlier, gone with locally arranged driving tests, driving ability tests. They've done it through driving schools, advanced driving schools, and asked applicants to pass tests with them. Rotherham are also consulting on a code of conduct for dealing with vulnerable passengers. They've gone on from the policy that they've actually got now. Another thing they're looking at is a code of conduct for dealing with vulnerable passengers. They've gone with safeguarding training, and they've gone with a policy of introducing safeguarding training to all current licence holders within 3 months. They are still consulting with the trade in relation to a dress code, because some of the operators in the city have a code of sorts. Some of them wear all red tops or all blue tops, just to identify as something different. So they're still consulting on a dress code. They've introduced a basic skills assessment in English and maths. The licensing panel are now gone back to adjudicating on things like that. They're also consulting on what they call a cab safe scheme. I don't know if the officers have heard of that, but it's basically a Hackney Encourage private hire quality scheme, and it begs the question: how well am I driving? It's like the thing on the back of the lorry. How is my comment on my driving, and it gives a number in the cab for people to see, to write in or ring and comment on the standard of driving. I'm not going to go into much more detail, but I do want to emphasise some of the things that Rotherham and other authorities are introducing in respect of operators. And the most important one to me there is that Rotherham have conditioned operators' licences that they can only employ and use drivers licensed in their authority. No operators within Rotherham can employ licence holders from out of the city. The problem's gone. Why can't we do that? Begs the question. They've also in their policy stipulated for specific offences as well. Theft, for example, and it makes specific reference to where there's deception and dishonesty in relation to trying to pull the wool over a panel's eyes in terms of not telling them something or not referring things to the authority. And again, finally, I think just in this section, Rotherham have gone to a position whereby the operators and the dispatchers in the operators' business are DBS checked and safeguarding trained, because they're the ones that are sending these drivers out. They're the ones that can pick up on patterns that shouldn't be there and stuff like that. So I mention all that, Chair, purely because I think whilst we need a new policy and we need to tighten it, we owe that to the public, but what we need to do is also we owe them the best possible policy. There are gaps, there are omissions in the policy that's being put forward. If it went to full council and was implemented on the 28th of November, I certainly wouldn't be comfortable as a licensing committee member to administer it. I think we need to ask the cabinet member to hold back on this a little, allow more time to get it right. If there's need to go out to consult with drivers and the trade on other matters such as I've mentioned, so be it. But for God's sake, let's get it right when we do it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Very, very valuable points were made. We will make sure we take back to the cabinet member.
Chair, there was just one point I was going to make. the chair is right, Councillor Poulter, there's some interesting, incredible stuff in there. Although hasten to add that some we actually already do, and some form part of the final proposal, which I understand will be coming before Council. So we're not a million miles away or apart from where Rotherham are. The one point I wanted to pick up, because again, I know it's something which featured largely in a lot of the free text commentaries that came through with the consultation, is that point about Rotherham not issuing licenses to people who wouldn't be employed in the city. That's a facility which is open to any licensing authority now. It's been there since the decision in the Blue Line case, and I know there's some people up in the corridor up there who were involved in that case in 2012 from the northeast of England. Because all it says is that a licensing authority that has the empirical data to support such a policy can introduce a policy whereby anyone it licenses would have to identify whether they intend to trade predominantly within their licensed area or outside of the licensed area. And if the response is outside, the licensing authority can legitimately refuse to issue them with a license. But the key words there are having the evidence to justify it. And why do I say that? I say that because all you can do is impose that and use that to regulate your own drivers. You can't use it to regulate drivers from elsewhere who can still freely come and trade in your area. So if, for example, Derby introduced that, it still won't stop the Gedlins and the Rosendale taxi drivers from coming here. All it stops is our own drivers going to trade elsewhere. And it's that data we don't have. The officers certainly have sat down and considered bringing such a paper to the council, but all the evidence points to the reverse. We have very little history or issues about our drivers wanting to trade outside of Derby. We have a lot of history of other drivers from elsewhere coming to trade in Derby, and we cannot regulate them, nor can Rotherham.
But there must be considerable evidence of our operators employing drivers from outside the city.
Unfortunately, again, another of those effects of the Blue Line case, nothing stops them from doing that. Anything we put in place to actually stop them doing that effectively becomes an unlawful restraint of trade. And that's part of the reason why not just the chair, who I know has written recently to the three ministers, but the LGA, it's the loophole in the law, which I know the Local Government Association and a lot of licensing authorities across the country, not just here in Derby, are really clamoring for change about. Because let's not forget what the commissioner said, what Casey said after Rotherham. She actually expressly invited all three Home Office ministers to urgently bring forward proposals for legislative change or guidelines, and it's still not been done.
But Rotherham have actually conditioned the operator's licence for them not to employ licence holders who have got licences issued from outside the city.
I'd like to see what wording they've used and how they've got around that. But clearly, my understanding, as I say, is that the Blue Line case, yeah, we'll have a chat about that outside. I think the point I'm making is that there's no one here who is against anything which is going to provide for a more robust licensing system, because ultimately that's what everyone collectively here is here to try and achieve.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thank you. I'd just like to say a little bit about the private hire and the Hackneys in Derby. Since I had my stroke 2 years ago, I've had to use them more than ever before. And quite honestly, I find them a pride of Derby City. They're courteous, helpful, and they drive nice. They don't throw you about a cab. So I can only praise them. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Wright.
Welcome.
Thank you. A couple of brief points. Firstly, in reply to a comment to my earlier presentation, which was on the lines of that taxis coming in from outside is responsible of the industry, not Derby City Council. That isn't entirely the case. Derby City Council should work with the industry to make the system cost-effective, rational, useful, to manage risk. We should not just take money from the industry, from the trade, but provide an effective service. The second thing I might well regret, there was a comment earlier from upstairs about executive transport. This is well beyond my knowledge base, but if I can act as an intermediary, then let me know and I'll email me and I'll see what can be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are we all agreed? We got two proposals we put forward by Councillor Pegg and by Councillor Porter. Take back that to the cabinet member, and all the comments have been made by the members. We take back to the cabinet to consider it. Are we all agreed? Yeah. Anybody against?
I was just going to get Jackie to confirm the questions which are going to Councillor Lawrence.
I was going to close the meeting.
Just so we can be clear, we've got it accurately written on.
Other 5 minutes we have to wait.
Members, I just want to be certain that we've accurately captured their comments which are going back from this committee to their cabinet member. I'm just going to hand you over to Jackie now to confirm what those are.
Okay, the two recommendations I've got are to ask the Cabinet Member and Director to come up with a proposal that recommends that decisions that are outside of the penalties points policy are referred to a licensing member panel for consideration. Bear with me. And the second proposal, that the government should have come up with some guidelines on taxi licensing, and we should make representation to relevant minister to take this to government.
To take this forward?
Yes. Okay.
Are we all happy? Yeah. Thank you very much. I close the meeting now. And also I would like to thank you, the member of public, you in gallery, they've been very good, and thank you very much. Don't worry, we're not against you, so we will consider everything.